All right, good morning. Today's guest speaker is Dr. Clint Schutte. He's the Assistant Superintendent for Business and Finance in Hayesville USD 261. And he's got a great history in terms of negotiations with teachers, having served on both sides, not at the same time, but in his career. So we're going to turn it over to him, and he's going to teach you quite a bit about interest-based bargaining and bargaining per se. So, Dr. Schutte, it's all yours.
All right. All right. Can you all see my screen? Hopefully everything's coming up clearly for you. Dr. Burke, can you see it?
I can.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Again, interest-based bargaining is really, I think, probably the best way to go about it. So when we cover this information, I think what you'll find is it is a very powerful tool. It's very useful in problem solving, but it is also a very good way to help build relationships between both administration and the labor group. We found that that relationship has thrived using interest-based bargaining. So as we go through this, we're going to talk about it, but just to give you a start, I want to show a video. This little video kind of gives you an example of what can happen in some traditional bargaining, and if you really pay attention to the intent of both parties, you'll see it's quite interesting how easy traditional bargaining can turn into an adversarial situation. So let's start with the little video here.
I figure 75% to you, Panma, and 25% divided between the five of us. Yida, Crowbar, myself, Tom, and the baby. That makes 5% for each one of us.
Billy, you're cheating yourself. If there's 25% divided among the five of you, that's 14% apiece.
Oh, no, listen, Pa. I wouldn't cheat you. You know I wouldn't. Now, look here. I'll show you. Let me rub this out here. And now, 25 divided by 5 is 5. You see, 5 won't go into 2, will it? No. But 5 goes into 25 5 times, you see?
No, you're wrong, Billy. Now, I'm a pretty good mathematician. Now, 5 into 25... 5 won't go into 2, will it?
No.
But 5 goes into 5 once. Now, we didn't use the 2 before, so we bring it down here. Now, 5 into 20 goes 4 times. There you are. 5 into 25, 14.
No, look, Pa. Let me prove it to you now by multiplication. 5 times 5. 5 times 5 is 25.
Really, I'm surprised you're learning.
Huh?
I'm surprised that you're learning. Now I'll show you. 5 times 14 is 25. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 1 is 5. 25. That's it.
No, look, Ma. See, look, you're wrong there because I'll prove it to you. We'll put down 5 14s here. 14, 14, 14. There. Now I'll prove to you by addition that 5 14s is not 25. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20.
21, 22, 23, 24, 25. There you are. Better brush up, Billy. I don't want to see you boys cheated.
When I showed this video in my classroom, it wasn't about negotiations. It was helping math students understand place value. But what you find with this is you can see from both sides, they came with the same intent. The intent was not to cheat the other side. The intent was to be fair. But you can see the frustration from both sides. And she says it's enough, and he throws the chalk at the end. And that's often what happens with traditional bargaining, is it becomes less about what's best intent for the organization or the groups or even the issues at hand, but more about the individuals involved and their frustrations with each other. IBB, the interest-based bargaining, has a way of helping you get past that, because it does have a strict set of guidelines on procedures on how you go through it. So when you're talking about negotiations between the labor organization and the administration, if you're both coming at it with positive intent, and often you both want what's best for the district, then interest-based bargaining is ideally situated for helping you build that relationship going forward with those ideas. But just so you guys know, just as a reminder, I know they changed some rules for the negotiations. You used to have to issue the letters on February 1st, and Dr. Burke would have to get his letter together, and we would meet, and board members would give their input, and then we'd have to meet with Hayesville Education Association, exchange our letters on February 1st. But that date has moved to March 31st, which pushes all of the end dates from when you have to sign up for impasse because you haven't completed in time, pushes that back. We found, at least I did in my experience, that if you don't settle negotiations before the end of the school year, sometimes it can be very difficult to get your teachers back to vote. I remember sitting in the middle school one summer and calling people and reminding them that we were holding the vote that day in order to get them to come out and to get just enough people to vote. So I know they've changed some of the rules. We, however, chose this year to stick with the same dates. I believe we still exchanged on February 1st, and we actually had ours settled by April. And again, interest-based bargaining can kind of help with that situation. So let me give you another example. I'm going to give you just another example. I'm sorry. Usually this is an interactive part. So I usually start with what do you want to know about negotiations and that. So if we get to the end of the presentation and you still have questions, I know you can submit those through Dr. Burke. He's got a lot of knowledge on this as well, and he can share them on and pass them through to me. If you have my email directly, you're more than welcome to send them to me if you still have questions. So I just want to make sure when we get through the end, if there's still things you have questions about, please don't hesitate to ask. Here's another good example, and this is a classic story, and this is one of the stories that they use in teaching individuals on how to do interest-based bargaining. This is the classic story of two chefs in a kitchen. They're down to one resource, and it's an orange left, and as you can imagine what would happen, very strong-willed individuals who are obviously very good at their profession, both have the desire for that orange, and you can see the debate. I need the orange, no, but I need the orange. And because time's running out, they come up with a classic compromise, and most people would think, okay, that's really a good way to do it. Good compromise, you cut the orange in half, they both get some resources, and what you find is that those resources, while it's a good compromise and we settled on this and you got some and I got some, one of them, of course, wanted the juice. And because he only got half an orange, he only got half what he needed for the recipe. The other one wanted the peel for the zest. And again, because he only got half the orange, he only got half the zest. And so those two recipes suffered. And if you think about negotiations, that's kind of what you're trying to avoid. While a compromise seems like a good solution, and in traditional bargaining, you get to a compromise quite often. You end up settling, and then both sides aren't completely happy, but somewhere along the line, something suffers. In this case, it's the recipes. So it was either the sauce that wasn't quite as good as it should have been, or the cake that wasn't quite as good as it should have been, because these two came up with a compromise, and that's traditional bargaining. And so I can imagine you probably can think of a better solution. Most of us do. Instead of cutting in half, one gets the peel, one gets the juice. And that's what happens when you take the stance of interest-based bargaining and you start to focus on the why. What is important to the individuals? If they had just taken the time to say, hey, why do you need the orange? One of them will probably have said, I just need the juice for my sauce. And the other one will be like, oh, that's great, no problem. I just need the peel. And they could have settled on it. But they didn't focus on the why. They focused on the what, the positions. And they both wanted that orange. And so interest-based bargaining helps us move from that traditional format of focusing on the what to focusing on the why. Why do we want to do this? And that question we found has really helped with a lot of those sticky, tricky issues. I'll give an example later on when I go through the format, but when you have individuals who are used to traditional, you really have to help them get past the, well, I don't want them to have, or they don't need that, or those kind of traditional what positions, and more into why is that important for it. I think one of the biggest ones for us is often plan time or teacher work time. And if we can actually look at why and how that affects students and how that affects staff, we've been very successful and come up with some great creative solutions. And that's what interest-based bargaining helps with. So now, just as a quick comparison, and I'm sure Dr. Burke's going to share this information with you all. Traditional bargaining, as I said before, they seem to focus on the position, and we want to do this, and most people come in with a predetermined solution. When you go into bargaining, you're like, we want to get to this, so oftentimes you'll strategize about making it worse so that you can compromise to get to where you really want. I've seen people be very tricky in those things. It's often when you go to negotiate for cost, you ask for the moon when you really only want to be able to go out at night. It's those kind of things. So we found that traditional bargaining can really damage the relationship between the two parties. I have to give Dr. Burke full credit because he's the one that brought interest-based bargaining to the Hayesville School District and suggested we go down this path. And at first, I was working for the teachers. I was their chief negotiator on the other side, and I was skeptical. I didn't think this would kind of work until I got in there, and I understood that the idea was to come up with what is a best solution for all of us. What's a win-win? And that's what interest-based bargaining does. It helps you understand the why, what's behind the reasoning. It promotes mutual solutions. It's a great problem solver. It allows you to come up with creative ways to do it, and it encourages multiple options. I remember in my very first negotiations, not even in this district, it was a traditional one, and we came in with our strategy, and we came in with what we were looking for, and there was absolutely no flexibility. We wanted it, they were going to do it, and that's it. We ended up in a situation where we went 2 years without a contract. That didn't help anybody. The labor relations were awful. Morale for the staff was awful. You're still 2 years later working at the same amount you were 2 years ago because we're fighting for time off and fighting for plan time. And it just didn't work out until we could finally come into a situation where we looked at, and then I left. That was down in San Antonio. I came up here. So I don't even know how that one even settled out. So just to help you out, there is a group of individuals paid for through tax dollars, so it's absolutely no cost to you. They're the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Services. You are welcome to contact them. They're a great group of guys. They will come out and they will do some training on this, because that's one of those additional things to the Negotiations Act, is now every year members of the negotiation teams have to have training. That training, however, is determined by the group. So we here in Hayesville use interest-based bargaining, and we do our initial review of the bargaining process as our training every year. We found that really helps everybody get back into gear. We also found if there are new members of either team, we ask these guys to come in and do a retraining. So I believe it was 2 years ago, we had a pretty good turnover on the teacher side, the HEA side. So we asked these guys to come back in, but everybody went to that training. Board members still came in, the board representative group came in, and we all went through the training and kind of went through it again just as a refresher. It's really good to go back and look, and going through it a second time kind of helped me again see how important it is that when you go into this negotiation side, that you have great relationships going forward afterwards. The group came in, we just had a great time. You would think we were all just best friends, which is not usual when it comes to negotiations. But for us, it's worked out great. So a lot of good information here. It's about a win-win, but I really want to go through the process with you. So there are some very strict steps that you go through, and believe it or not, a lot of it is prep before you even start negotiating. Before you even start the process part, you've got to set some things up. The first thing, you set up are ground rules, and at first when we were setting up our ground rules, we were kind of superficial with it, but we were asked by our federal mediation and conciliation group to be a little more specific. So you will see, if you can look at our ground rules here, we included a tremendous amount of detail, including what size will the teams be? Can we allow any alternates? Are we going to allow release time? What constitutes a quorum, down to the dates, the location, who's going to bring snacks, what are our goals? Do we allow outside people in? Do we allow a caucus? What's our schedule for ratification, including what's our plan for communication? And if you're talking about all of these ground rules ahead of time, it helps because you run into some of those traditional things like caucuses, where individuals would go off and discuss what was being discussed and come back. And we found in those cases, it was often during those times when people would be angry and, oh, did you believe what he said, and that kind of stuff. And if you can avoid those because you're all having an open discussion, then it helps with that relationship side. We also went down all the way to the details of no personal attacks. We want to make sure we treat each other as professionals. Who was going to take notes? Kim Forgy has been our note taker from the beginning. We thank her so much every year. And exactly things like conversations. And you guys all know, working with teachers, side conversations happen all the time. But we made it a rule that there will only be one conversation at a time so that we are all active participants in the process. And we establish these ground rules ahead of time. It's one of the first things we do, and go through all the details, all the way down to the date of ratification. What day do we want to have this done on? The next thing we do is we develop standards. And standards are the ones you use to check your options against. So standards, for us, we came up with 4 of them. Affordable, mutual gain, doable, and ratifiable. And then we spent a tremendous amount of time going through scenarios. What does affordable mean if it's this scenario? What does mutual gain mean if it's this scenario? And ensuring everybody agreed there was complete 100% consensus on the standards before we use them, before they were finalized. One of the biggest ones that was tough to do was the mutual gain. Because if you look at that, it improves the problem without harming another interest. Well, if you start to look at what are all the possibilities of other interests, that took us quite a while to go through it and establish what does that actually mean without harming another interest. And we had to look at a lot of examples. We had to take scenarios through so that everybody agreed prior to going through. The next thing you do is you identify the issues. Well, in this case, our issues on that same page here, those issues are identified on your letters. So when your letters of intent to negotiate, these are the things you're going to negotiate for. I believe the changes to the Negotiation Act also mandate that you will negotiate for salary, compensation, and then you can go up to 3 other items agreeable to both sides. But you can also do other items if both sides agree. So you can see we have quite a few items on our letter, and everybody agreed. But identifying the issues is really twofold, and I'll show you again here in a minute. First, it's just defining them. So if we put this on our letter, you can see we had some individuals who helped clarify language pertaining to teachers serving in elected political office. And so we had some individuals who had worked on that and had some information. And so they worked on it, and even on the next meeting brought back more information. So you spend time not just identifying the issues, but clarifying what they are. So that is the last step on the setup process, is clarifying those issues. And then, just like traditional educators, check for understanding. You want to make sure everybody at the table, both sides, and it's kind of interesting, we don't really sit on opposite sides, we intermingle. So if you come into an IBB process for us, you would not be able to tell who's on the board side and who's on the teacher side, because we're just intermingled, we're interspersed, and it changes pretty much with every meeting. But you need to make sure everybody who's having this discussion understands what those issues are. And we do that ahead of time. That is part of the setup. It's really big, because this is the key to identifying the why. If you say the issue is evaluation process, then we need to understand, well, okay, why is that an issue? Well, if you guys remember correctly, not too long ago, the legislators changed the laws on it, so we had to address it. If you have language for new teacher pre-service training, well, why is that important? How does that affect the educational process? Why? And I believe that was one of the ones that the Board of Education brought. We were looking to expand. We really felt like new teachers should have more training to get them up to speed on the initiatives the district has. It's not really fair to them to have them come in cold and say, well, why aren't you using, for example, literacy first? Well, if we have never trained you on literacy first, it's just not fair to them. So we expanded pre-serve training. But in clarifying that issue, we defined all that and make sure everybody at the table understands what those are. Those are all key. And as you can see, all of that is prior to actual negotiations. Because once you go through the now setup and now you're ready for the process, if you have those things all established, you avoid some of those complications. So the process is pretty straightforward. You come back, you review the issue again. So you talk about it, you develop options, you clarify those options. And this is where the only one conversation at a time or no personal attacks really plays. Because we open this up to complete brainstorming, creativity. When you develop an option, any member of that team on either side can have an option, and they put it up there. And when it comes to clarifying that option, they are the ones who describe. If you have a question on it, they'll tell you what they meant. And it really is important for us to take that through. And then you take it through the standards. So I wanted to give you this page, just kind of give you the look. This is how it works. Here was one of our issues in services and workdays. We define the interests. The teachers need additional time to work in their classroom before school starts. I'm sure many of you out there have experienced this. We develop the options, and so we just start listing them. And we keep going until there are no more options available at that time. Nobody else can come up with one. So we don't even do the standards yet until we have all the options. And we'll keep going. I mean, people have come up with options. I think we at one time had 19 options on one issue. Once you have all the options that you can come up with at that point in time, you then go back and you take each option and compare them to the standards. And this is where you have to reach consensus. So if we added a work day at the beginning of the school year and take off November 10th, that's Day for Veterans. Now, this was a while ago because now we do have Veterans Day off. But when we went through the options, someone said no on mutual gain. And so we mark no. If anybody says no, you mark no. If anybody has a question, they say, I'm not so sure, you put a question mark. Everybody has to say yes. If they don't, you mark it that way. And then you just mark them. You go through each one. You don't stop. That's the difficult part. The team often, when someone says no, you'll hear somebody say, well, why? And we have to remind them, remember, that's not the process. Let's take them through the standards first. So we took each option through the standard. And you can see that there are 3 of them, option 6, option 3, and option 2, that all got yeses. So in other words, all 3 of those could be the solution to this issue. So we could add a workday at the beginning of the school year and get paid for it. It's roughly $90,000 for the certified staff time. We could do nothing, leave it status quo. And then, or we could change the second day of the building and service days at the beginning of the school year to a half in-service day in the AM and half workday in the PM. And that would give teachers a half-day workday increase. And when we went through and all those were yeses, it's at that point in time that you have to reach consensus. It's identify the options by consensus. Which of those all yeses can everybody in the room say, yep, we're good with that? And by taking those through the standards, you're doing that comparison. It kind of takes it away from that personal contact. You're looking at the whys behind it. And so you're really developing some creative options. So we tried that one, and that one has stayed in our calendar. So it's worked every year. It didn't increase work time. It didn't increase cost. And so everybody by consensus said, you know what? We're in a tough financial time. We really can't afford to pay people. Why don't we go with the one that doesn't cut costs? It was about a half-day workday, and it worked great. And it was a creative solution. When traditionally, we could have been like, oh, you don't need more work time, but we need more work time. And we might not even gotten anything settled on that. But by taking it through the steps of setup and processing it through IBB, we came up with all kinds of creative options. We've done some really creative ones, down to allowing building principals some flexibility on their building in-service days versus QPA days versus work days. That allowed individual buildings to do things a little bit differently, because your high school and your elementary don't necessarily need the same staff development. So the final step, however, is when you've taken every issue through and you have solutions, or in some cases, you go with the status quo. The final step is to communicate out to everybody else. So we, at the meeting, go through and develop the minutes, and we put our names on it. Here's who was here, who the presenters were, who the evaluation committees were, if you're talking about any committees down here. And we go through and show on every issue, what did we come up with using this process? And we've found that over the years, it has completely helped with the relationship part. I will tell you, though, you have to be very transparent. And if you've said, we only have this amount of money, and then you turn right around and say, oh, well, we found this money to do this, it will erode that relationship completely, and it won't work. We sit down with the staff ahead of time. We show them exactly where our books are at and where we're at, and this process works. But I will tell you also, I've used this as a problem-solving process where you have individuals say, hey, we have an issue over here. If you go through that same process of setting it up so that you have standards, you know what the issue is, and then as a group, come up with options and then take those options through those standards, you'd be amazed at how creative people can be in solving solutions. So, and that is the basis of interest-based bargaining right there, is to be able to have a win-win situation. So again, the one we came back with on this one had all the yeses. Everybody agreed on consensus. We marked it, and then we move on to the next issue. Now, that's bargaining in a nutshell for us. But there's a lot out there when it comes to traditional bargaining. So if you have questions, if there are things that have come up when it comes to negotiations and labor relations that you have still, please don't hesitate. Send that through Dr. Burke. He's got a lot of experience as well. He's had a lot of experience in labor relations as well. So let's see. Are there any questions?
I do have one question.
You bet.
Do members of the team ever confuse issues and options?
Oh, often. When the teams are discussing those, sometimes an option could cause an issue, and we've even had some discussions where individuals who have come up with specific options have decided that their option is the only one, and they become what we call a blocker. And it's quite interesting because this happened actually on the board's team once and on the teacher's team once as well. And this is where the federal mediator kind of helped us out. But on the board's team, we had to talk to that individual and remind them that their option, while we thought was creative, isn't necessarily the only option for the issue we currently have, and that if they're going to force us to go with that issue, then they're kind of disrupting the whole process and they're being a blocker. And it's our job as a team member to point it out to them. And believe it or not, this was the board president, and she said, yeah, you're right, I am. I need to step back. And she changed her mind on it. On the teacher side, it happened the exact same way. There was one teacher, they wanted this, and it benefited the middle school. Their option was the only one. We had to have it, and it was the teacher's team that confronted that individual and let them know they're being a blocker and disrupting the process. Now, of course, John Dorn was the federal mediator at the time. He's the one that pointed out to the team, hey, we got an issue. So they did talk to her. And, of course, that's not always an easy thing. Sometimes it's hurt feelings. But if we remind them about coming back to let's focus on the why, not a single solution, it works.
Using interest-based bargaining, what's the longest period of time in terms of days that you've had to go to negotiations before you got a tentative agreement, and what's the shortest amount?
Well, the longest, we usually spend a half day setting up. So the longest was 1 full day and 2 hours in the next morning. That was the longest. So we never have gone even 2 full days. The shortest, however, we finished by 10 o'clock the first morning. And there were 7 issues on that day. 7 issues.
And then the members of the each team, are they selected by grade level or building level or?
Well, in our case, I was fortunate. I was working with the teachers at the time when you guys brought this in, and we went this route. And so what we decided to do is we wanted to have equal representation. So in our HEA's constitution, the negotiations team is described to be divided up. So you have representation from every level. So elementary, middle, and high school. You need to have representation of classroom teacher as well as non-classroom certified, so counselors, librarians, those kind of situations. And then, of course, you have a head negotiator. And then on the board side, you guys did it kind of the same way. You set it up so that we had representation from the levels. So we either have middle school, high school, elementary on there, but we also have, for example, director of the Learning Center on there, who, of course, is outside of the school. And then, of course, I serve on there, and then we want board representation. So we usually have 2 board members that serve on that because part of the standard of ratification, you want to make sure you have board members that represent the will of the board.
All right. Now, in a more traditional bargaining sense, at least in my experience, well, first of all, in my experience, IBB is the only way to go.
I would agree.
Having tried both, and if you don't get a settlement by a certain date, then technically you're at impasse.
Correct.
And if you don't get a settlement going through mediation after impasse, you can end up in fact-finding.
Correct.
And if you don't get a settlement after fact-finding, you can find yourself in unilateral contracts.
Exactly.
And so I'm one of the few superintendents who's been through impasse and mediation and fact-finding.
Wow.
And the one we went to fact-finding in, the fact-finder actually decided the issues and said that the board won on all 3.
Oh, really?
And the more interesting piece of that was the UNISERV director sent an email out to all staff in the district declaring victory. And so that was difficult. I thought it was maybe job protection for him since they did not win. But there were such hard feelings about the whole process that's when I, in my previous district, brought in interest-based bargaining and suggested to both sides this was the way to go. We didn't need this much animosity, and we needed a better process to use to improve labor relations. And both sides decided, yeah, that's a great idea.
Well, and I can tell you from experience here, prior to your tenure here, the previous head negotiator, it was so stressful. He actually had a nervous breakdown. Part of it was the labor relations. It was so stressful. There was so much animosity. That doesn't happen. The chief negotiator for the association and I talk on a regular basis now. I mean, we talk all the time. So it's one of those things that we make sure we check for clarification. It's been so beneficial that even when you have issues that come up that might be a grievance, they'll call and say, hey, are we looking at a grievance here? Is this really an issue? And we've been able to settle a lot of issues just by having that open communication. It's just open communication. So
great. Well, Dr. Schutte, thank you so much. You're a wealth of information. If they have any questions that I can't answer, I'll be sure to filter them back to you, and we'll get good answers for them.
Well, I thank you very much, sir. You have a great one.
All right, you too. Thanks.